Can you hear me too? I'm gonna hang up the phone. Mrs. Ryman, can you hear me? It seems like you're connected. I just heard you for a moment, so I'm hoping that you're hearing me.
Yes, I unmuted you on this spot here.
Okay, Nes Gadol Hayapo, great miracle. Okay, we're gonna get started in just a moment.
I just can't seem to scroll down on this thing.
I'm gonna control the scrolling.
Very good.
But if you can, it'll be even better for those that are on Zoom to click on the link on the chat, which will give you the source sheet, and then you can follow along.
I've got the source sheet. It's up.
Okay. So if you can click on the source sheet, you'll be able to see even, you'll be able to scroll even more easily.
Oh, I clicked. Should I click on the title? I clicked, nothing happened here.
David, can you go to get the door? Thank you. Oh, hi, Amy. I'm so glad you're here. Even though there are several Zoomers, I much prefer in person. Okay. Yeah. Okay. A few people are still joining. We're going to get started in just 1 minute, as a few people are coming in to the Beit Midrash as well. Okay, for those that are on Zoom, I put the source sheet on the chat, and I would suggest that you click it and that you open it up in a window that you can follow along on your own. It'll be much easier, as I'm not going to be able to do both, teach in person and scroll at the exact pace that I'm talking. So I'll invite you to follow along by clicking the link in the chat. Okay. Hold on a second. Let me try. Okay, I'm going to suggest that everyone that's online mute themselves. I'm actually going to sign in and out so I can just start the recording again. I'll be right back and then we're going to get started, but stay there. Okay, Erev Tov, good evening to all. Delighted that we are starting to get ready for Shavuot together. Now that we have Lag BaOmer in the rearview mirror, it is time. So we're going to begin that preparation for Shavuot by looking at the Megillah of Shavuot, of Megillat Ruth. And again, the source sheet for those that are on Zoom is in the chat, and I encourage you to access it that way. The Megillot of Tanakh are included for a reason. The Anshe Knesset Hagdola had a particular purpose in mind for canonizing the Chamesh Megillot. If we think about Yonah, what's the reason for Yonah? There's a message about tshuva, that tshuva works, and that Hashem accepts tshuva, even though it might go against certain tenets of justice, that people should suffer for misbehavior and be punished for it properly. Megillat Esther, of course, is the pretext for Purim. It's how we understand the miracle and the mitzvot hayom. So the question when it comes to Megillat Ruth is, why was it canonized? Why did Shmuel write it? And why did he not just put it into Sefer Shoftim? We know from the very beginning of Megillat Ruth that the time marker is the time of the Shoftim. And so why not subsume it into the Shoftim, just like other stories were, like Shimshon is just a part of the broader Sefer of Shoftim. So why does Ruth get its own Sefer? Why is it a Megillah? So in general, there are three schools of thought on this. The first is that Rabbi Zera says that there's nothing halachic in the book of Ruth. It's all about rewarding good character. It's about the enduring message that goodness matters and that there are benefits to behaving generously. That's one approach to the message of the Megillah, the primary lesson. Another is that it's about Hashem. There is so much overt theology in Megillat Ruth, in terms of Hashem operating and pulling the strings to bring the plot to fruition. Naomi and Boaz are full of references to Hashem, that they reference Hashem throughout. So those are two schools of thought. What's the third school of thought? Amy? Indeed, right? The legitimacy of the Davidic monarchy is at stake with regard to the purity of its lineage. And so that's the third school of thought. And I just took the introduction of Ibn Ezra to Megillat Ruth to articulate this approach. Ba'avur, we're in source number 1 here, Ba'avur Hayot David Shoresh Malchut Israel, because David was the root of all future Jewish kingship, Nichtav B'Sifrei HaKodesh Yachas David. It was appropriate to have the yichus of David through a separate sefer in Tanakh. So that is the reason to write and to include Megillat Ruth. But why is there a need to legitimate the lineage of David? What would be, whenever there's a reason to justify something, usually it's because there are reasons that call it into question. So what are the problematic components of David's lineage? What are violations or potential violations of relationships that we can come up with? David, Amy, what do you say? Okay, great. So that's the primary one that we think about in terms of David's grandmother's nationality as being Moabite, which doesn't seem to be a nationality that can be well or easily integrated into the Jewish people. What else?
Judah and Tamar appeared before the Torah was given, so there's some leeway there, but it.
Great. So if we look at the family tree of David here in source number 2, and I apologize that there are both Old and New Testament sources in this. This just happened to be the most concise one I could find that was easily available, that was accurate for what and had the information that I wanted to use. So we certainly see that Ruth was a descendant of Moab, which makes her problematic on a surface level, and we're gonna get to more background of that in a minute. That's problem number 1. David's pointing out problem number 2, which is that on the other side of the family tree, from Boaz's side, Boaz is a product of Peretz. Peretz is a product of Yehuda and Tamar. I'm skipping a few generations there, but that's the overall, overall direction of the family tree. And Yehuda was Tamar's father-in-law. And that is one of the 15 arayot, one of the 15 forbidden relations. So we have to deal with the issue of Yehuda and Tamar's union, and we're going to put that to next week. That's the second story of that's the second lineage of Megillat Ruth, how Chazal rescue that problematic narrative to legitimate David's ancestry. But there's a third problem in David's family tree. What is it? Anything come to mind by looking at the chart here?
Well, go back further. Ruth's lineage Lot and his daughters.
Bingo. So another one of the arayot was violated when Lot has relations with his daughters, and that creates Moab and Ammon. And so that incest is also part of David's ancestry. And so we're going to deal with the first and third issues tonight, which is on the right side of the family tree, right? The line between Lot and Moab and the line between Moab and Ruth. Those are the two question marks that the Megillah and Chazal try to deal with. And next week, we're going to reserve our time for the second one that was mentioned, at least in this evening, which is the issue of Yehuda and Tamar, and how that affects or doesn't affect the lineage of David. Okay, great. So moving along to the first lineage challenge, that of Moab. So we're familiar that Ammonim and Moavim can't come into the community. Here we're in source number 3. Lo yavo Ammoni uMoavi bikal Hashem. Gam dor asiri, even until the 10th generation. Lo yavo lahem bikahal Hashem ad olam. They cannot come into the community forever. So what does that mean? Lo yavo lahem bikahal. What way of entry is that prohibiting? What do we think?
Marriage.
Marriage. Okay. So on the surface, one might wager that it is any way of entering the community, whether it's through conversion or through marriage, but there are no restrictions on conversions. Anybody of any origin can convert to Judaism, even if they come from Amalek. So the restriction here, as was pointed out, is specifically about marriage. Lo yavo lahem bikahal is lashon of kiddushin, that there can't be marriages with a Moabite. And what's the reason for that? Al davar asher lo kidmu etchem belechem u'mayim. They were inhospitable. B'derech b'tzeitchem mimitzrayim, when you were leaving Egypt. Ve'asher aschar alecha et Bilam, and they also hired Bilam ben Beor mipator ram naharayim leklalecha. They also hired a guy to curse you and to cause trouble for you. So not only did they not give you provisions, they also tried to make it harder for you. Now, was this when we left Egypt, B'derech b'tzeitchem mitzrayim? Not really. This is actually after the 40 years on their way towards Eretz Yisrael, when they were on the eastern side of the Jordan River. This was part of their leaving of Egypt and making it to Eretz Yisrael, but really it's more in the entry than it is in the exit from entry to Israel than it is from the exit to Mitzrayim. So we see here from this pasuk the prohibition to have a Moabite marry into the Jewish people. But the question is, what is the scope of this? So we narrowed it down to marriage, but does this apply equally to men and to women? Right? The pasuk has it in lashon of the lashon of for men, right? Of lo yavo Ammoni, and lo yavo lahem bikahal is the masculine language. So one way to understand that would be that the default in the Torah is to use masculine language, but it's really inclusive of both men and women. So that's, I think, the pshat. But then that presents a problem for Ruth on two levels. How can Ruth marry into the family of Elimelech, right? How can Orpah and Ruth, both who are Moaviot, be accepted by Elimelech and Naomi? How can they allow their sons, Machlon and Chilion, to marry these two Moabite women? And then later, how can Boaz marry a Moaviyah? Even if she did convert, which seems to be the pshat, she is still called Moaviyah throughout the book, as if that identity still clings to her even after the conversion, and Boaz does not seem to have any hesitation, nor anyone else from Beit Lechem, with that wedding taking place. So, the Gemara in Masechet Yevamot goes into the scope of this prohibition in a way that protects David by limiting it to men alone and not pertaining to women. So the context of this Gemara is important. It's talking about Doeg, who is a king that also serves, he's a non-Jewish king who also serves as an advisor to David. So we'll read this Gemara together to appreciate the way in which Chazal read this pasuk, or to the way that they limited the prohibition on Moabites coming into the nation so as to make way for Orpah and Ruth to enter into the Jewish people. More significantly, of course, Ruth over Orpah. Okay, so now we are in source number 4. So Mina Hanimile. So where do we know that a female Moabite can marry into the Jewish community? Amar Rabbi Yochanan de Amar Kra, based on the following exchange. B'kirot Shaul et David yotze likrat haplishti. When Shaul saw that David would volunteered and was now going out to fight the Plishti, who is this Plishti? Goliath. Okay. And where did this take place? In Emek Ha'elah. I mentioned that because I was just there 2 weeks ago with a CJP trip. We went to Emek Ha'elah as a destination where many people who aren't so knowledgeable would know that this is where the battle between David and Goliath happened. If you don't know too many stories from Tanakh, you at least know that one. So it resonated with many unaffiliated Jews who could appreciate that this is where the Bible took place. So the showdown between Goliath and David is about to take place. And I can't go on before mentioning a really cool feature about Goliath's lineage. Who does Goliath come from? So if you look on the last source, I think I put it on the source sheet. If you scroll down to the last source on the page, yeah. So in Sota, the Gemara says that Goliath's mother was Orpah. So David and Goliath are cousins. So there's more that meets the eye in terms of this matchup. There is also sort of a little bit of a family rivalry going on. And we're not going to go too psychodynamic right now, but it's just a fascinating sort of side note there. So getting back to our featured text here, to the Gemara in Yevamot. So when Shaul sees David getting ready to fight his, third cousin, whatever it is, Amar el Avner, he says to his trusted commander, his officer, Sar Hatzava, Ben Mize Hanar, who is this lad? Avner, right? Vayomer Avner, Chai nafshecha melech im yadati. And he says, I don't know who this guy is. So this is a very puzzling exchange between Shaul and his commander. V'lo yadale, and Shaul did not know this guy. V'hakativ v'yahaveyu ma'od v'yihi lo nosei kelim. We know that there was previous interaction in the last chapter between David and Shaul. David had come and stood there to be his arm bearer. There were, I think, also times where he played for him music, both before this and after this. So, of course, he knew who David was. So, what's the question that is being asked at this moment? Not about who this person is, but rather, who does this person come from? What is his lineage? Now, why does that matter? Remember, what did Shaul promise to the one that could defeat the Plishtim?
Royal marriage.
Royal marriage, his own daughter. And so if he was going to invite someone into the royal family, he had to make sure that they were legit. So what he's asking his commander here is to sort of check out who this guy is. And Abner says, how am I supposed to know? Okay. And so at that point, when they're not sure, Amar le Doeg ha'adomi. So Doeg, who is the Adomite, what is he doing in the palace of Shaul? It's a great question. How Doeg ends up penetrating the Jewish, commonwealth and becoming an advisor to the king is a baffling question, and he gives Shaul a lot of very bad advice. And so Doeg, pops into the conversation, and it says, "Ad shata mash'el alav im hagun h'malchut im lav, sha'al alav im ra'il avo b'kahal alav, my taima deka'ate merut ha'moaviyah." So Doeg says the reason why you really have to look into this and to be concerned about this is because I know that this red-headed, kid actually descends from a Moabite, from Ruth HaMoaviyah. So there is suspicion even before David has his first shining moment as to the legitimacy of him being married into the royal family. Forget becoming the royal family, right? Because Doeg is already raising doubts as to his legitimacy. Amar le Avner, and Avner responds back to Doeg in front of Shaul, Tanena Amoni, Vilo Amonit, Moavi, Vilo Moavit. So Avner, who all of a sudden becomes a shtickle Talmud Chacham, says, look back at the prohibition in Devarim. Does it say Moavit? No, it says Moavi. And Ruth is a Moaviyah. She's a Moavit. And so the prohibition is limited in scope. So how can the general of an army make this halachic ruling on the spot? It seems to be very much in the interest of, the commander in chief to say, this guy's legit, let him go fight, right? They're desperately looking for somebody to kill Goliath, and here is their opportunity. So he seems to be working backwards and say, I need to justify this guy's legitimacy just so that he can have anybody get up there and give us a chance at overcoming our enemy. So the Gemara wonders where Avner got this from. And it says, Kach mekublani mi beit dino shel Shmuel haramati. So that he got this law from whom? From Shmuel. Shmuel was the one that anointed David to be king. And so David's legitimacy was under question. And Shmuel took the position that Ruth was kosher to come into the community, right? And there seemed to be some sort of pretext there because it served the purpose of confirming what he was going to do or what he was about, or what he was going to, or what he already did, right? And so it's fascinating here that they're bringing a halacha from the Beit Din of a Navi. It's a very unusual source for a halacha, right? But what is the Beit Dino Shel Shmuel HaMelech, Shmuel HaNavi. It might not be an actual, legal court, but it might be the authorship of Megillat Ruth. Shmuel wrote Megillat Ruth to defend his appointing of David as king, right? And so, again, it's a little bit anachronistic, but Avner is leaning on Shmuel, who was certainly, alive at the time, that this is a legitimate halachic position. And then Shmuel goes even further because he knows that these suspicions were cast very early on to defend David's lineage. Okay. So Adkan, until now, we have examined the first potential problem of David's ancestry, which is that he came from a Moabite. And we have concluded that it is not a problem because Ruth was a female and the prohibition against marrying a Moabite only pertains to males. Okay. Any comments or questions on that so far?
Who's con- Right. Doesn't really- if that's not-
Yeah. It's a fair point. And I'll make it even stronger that if the Moabites were ungracious to the Jewish people and didn't give them food, right? Was it just the men who were responsible for that? Or was it the women as well? Presumably it was both. So if the reason for the prohibition is rooted in both of those experiences, right? Then why distinguish between the men and the women at all? Just looking back to see about your question here about Cosby. I forget if she was from Moab or from Ammon. It was Moab. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter too much, but just wanted to look here. Yeah, so she. Yeah, so it was the Moabite women who were sent to cause the men to go astray. So the question is a great one. But nevertheless, the distinction is made between men and women so as, to legitimate, maybe not so as, but which proves which paves the path for David's lineage to be pure. Okay.
Rabbi Cheses, I
Yeah.
would think that the men are, the Moabite men, those are the ones in charge of, are we giving money out to strangers? Are we giving, are we feeding these strange people? Right. So I don't know. I think that you could say it's really, it's on the men, not really on the women. The women have to kind of listen to their husbands when it comes to.
In a patriarchal society, we could certainly make that point, make that separation. But then Amy's point is well taken as well. Of the beginning or the end of Parshat Balak of Vayeshev Yisrael Bashitim Vayachel Ha'am Liznot El Benot Moav, right? So the Moabite women were the ones that seduced the Jewish men. So you could make the same argument there too to say who sent them? Did they do it on their own? or they were sent by their husbands or by the men of the society at the behest of Bilam, who, even though it's not explicit, it seems like he is the one who says, I can't really get the Jews through cursing, so we're going to have to go through another means, i.e., through some sort of seduction. So again, there's potential for distinguishing between men and women, but it's not, I would say, crystal clear. Right. Yeah, we definitely see some female. Yeah, we have some female protagonists who take matters into their own hands. So that's a counterpoint. Yeah, David.
Cosby was of Midianite
Okay,
lineage.
that's what I was searching for. I
Father was Cosby Batsur Rosh Kitab Binyan Hu. And later on, when Bnei Israel go out to battle, they're actually taking vengeance on the Midianites.
Okay.
Even though it does explicitly mention Belt Moab
Right.
in the episode with Baal Peor, it seems to have been both Moab and Midian, and Midian is the one that go out and attack later on.
Right. So you're correct to point out that both Midian and Moab are in it together against Bnei Israel, and even though Cosby, who is sort of the chief, or I would say the most public, display of seduction is Bat Nasi Midian. Still, it's clear that the Benot Moab do take part in it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we've, I think we'll press pause on this problematic part of David's lineage, but to realize that there's still question marks in terms of why is it that the women are allowed and the men are not to come into the community, if women seem to have participated in some part of why we are distancing them from our community, even if the men are more fundamentally responsible for it. Okay, let's move on to the second problem of David's lineage, which we outlined, which is that of Lot. So if we examine the parsha of the Arayot, the forbidden unions, which is Perek Yud-Chet of Sefer Vayikra. Here we're in source number 5. So there are 2 of the 15 that are problematic for David, as we mentioned at the very beginning. Right, in Perek Yud-Chet, the first 5 psukim are really an introduction. What I brought for you here are the prohibitions of arayot that are of the same flesh, kol she'er bisaro, which includes the arayot that are forbidden because they are uncovering the nakedness of one's own family, essentially. And within that list, I bolded 2 that are in violation or potential violation here, which is in Pasuk Yud Aleph, Ervat bat Eshet Avicha, Moledet Avicha, Achodchahi, Lo Tegale Ervata. So you cannot have relations with your father's wife, your father's wife's daughter, who was born into your father's household, Um, hold on. Right, you can't have relations with the daughter of your father's wife, right? That's you're essentially going to be like your sister. Um, okay, hold on a second here. Yeah, so that's exactly where we're headed, which is that the Gemara notes that in this list of arayot, one's own biological daughter is not explicit, it is only implicit. So, and the reason why that's significant is because even though it does make it to the list, it makes it through a kal v'chomer. And why is it that the arayot of one's own daughter is not listed explicitly in the Torah, and it's only through a kal v'chomer? So this, I have to give credit to Seth Kasowski, who connected the dots for me by suggesting a theory that this is the Torah's way of excusing, to an extent, the union of Lot and his daughters. That's a pretty wild theory, but I think there's something to it, because all of the other krovim, all of the other she'er b'saro are mentioned explicitly, right? But not that of daughter. So I'll just read for you quickly in source number 10 in Masechet Yevamot. The first Mishnah says Chamesh Esrei Nashim Potrot Tzarotehen. So when it comes to Yibum, if the Yibum would be in violation of one of these 15, then the Yibum is not going to be necessary. It's going to be prohibited, right? The Eluhain, and these are those 15: Bito, Ubat Bito, Ubat Beno, Ubat Ishto, right? So that includes the daughter of the Yavam, right? So that situation would be that the deceased brother had married a daughter of his brother, which means that when he died childless, his brother's own daughter came before her father, and therefore she is exempt. Okay, so the Gemara wonders, how do we know that daughter is one of the 15, is one of the arayot, if it's not explicit in the Parshia, in the section about arayot? And so the Gemara in source 11 says that we learn it through a hekesh, through a verbal analogy in the word hena, that the word hena is used by in one pasuk related to your granddaughter, and it's also used in another pasuk related to your daughter, and therefore we compare the two such that one's own biological daughter, not just the daughter of one's wife through a different marriage, would be considered to be one of the arayot. And so this is I think a really intriguing suggestion for how Chazal try and deal with this problematic component of David's ancestry, by saying that what Lot did with his daughters was problematic, but we're not going to give it so much attention by listing it explicitly but it's not listed explicitly in the Torah. It's only through a sort of backdoor method. So I'm not going to read the episode of Lot and his daughters inside, but what I do want to note is that Lot was a character who was always on who was always dependent on Avraham. And source number 7. Sorry, not numbers. Yeah, in source number 7, we see something fascinating about one of the arayot, and this will connect back to Lot, who was as I said, dependent on Avraham, and was therefore a recipient of his chesed, and became a subject as a result of being dependent upon him. So the pasuk talks about a situation, the isha sherikach et achoto bat aviv. If a person marries his own sister, o bat imo, whether it's through the father or the mother, v'ra'et ervata, v'hi tiret ervato chesed hu. That this is considered to be a chesed for a brother to marry a sister. They carry their sin, they are punished by karet. So what does the word chesed here mean? Obviously, it can't mean a good thing, because this is one of the arayot. So Rashi says that chesed hu lashon arami cherpach chisuda, that this is an expression of disgrace, and not kindness or generosity, but actually that of disgrace. So what's the connection between this being such a negative thing? So why is it cast through a shoresh that we would typically think about in a positive way? So he brings a midrash, im tamar Kain nasa achoto, chesed asa hamakom, that when Cain marries his sister, that was a chesed. Why is that a chesed? Livnot olamo mimenu, because how many other options were there on the shidduch market? And this was the only way that the world could continue. Shne'amar olam chesed yibaneh. And so when the Tehillim talks about building a world, it uses the word chesed to talk about constructively procreating, to settle the universe through population. And that is what Cain and Hevel, that's what Cain was doing by marrying his sister. And so this midrash, I think, which is talking about an arayot, which is a huge violation. Sometimes you would think a brother marrying a sister, taking a sister in, is a huge chesed, but it's actually a great violation. It's only going to be a chesed if that's the only option. And so we could transpose this back on Lot as well, because when Lot was looking at Sodom in the rear view mirror and realizing that there was nothing left, he thinks that there is no other way to continue the human race other than to have relations with his daughter. So whichever direction the responsibility comes from, it's still a violation of the arayot. Whether it was initiated by the daughter or the father, even if he was, tricked into it, it was still, the act happened, and it was still a vulgar act, right? But the daughters, as we can see in source number 6, who got their father intoxicated, said that this might be the only way to have continuity of the human race, and that's where Moab started. So there is this notion of Moab being started through this chesed, right? Through this thing which can be the greatest generosity or also the greatest atrocity. And so all of Sefer Brut is about the virtue of chesed, even when it's taken to an extreme form, when it's done with the right intention and in the right context, then it makes a world of difference. And so perhaps, and again, this is speculation, the way that Megillat Rut is rehabilitating the ancestry of David is by recasting what Lot did with, or what Lot's daughters did with him as an act of chesed. Not the chesed of violation, but the chesed of this is the only way that the human species could continue, right? And that is sort of what Yibum is ultimately about as well. It's about taking something which is typically within the family and not endorsed, but doing it in a way that the name of the deceased continues on. And that was the chesed of Boaz. And so that's the sort of second way in which the Megillah is about monarchy and goes back to sort of clean up the questionable origins of David, not just through his connection to Ruth HaMoaviyah, but also through the union of Lot's daughters and Lot. Okay, I think we're going to stop here as it's 9:05. And next week, we're going to take up the other side of the family tree, which is about how the Megillah specifically rehabilitates David's ancestors going back on Boaz's side and connected to Elimelech, and with Tamar and Yehuda. How that violation of the Arayot is also not such a violation because it's also some form of Yibum, some form of Chesed. Okay, so that's the direction we're going to go in next week. But I hope this can at least help us put a little bit more depth in appreciating what the Megillah is doing for David's lineage. Instead of it just being a family tree at the end, we can now appreciate the layers of that family tree, and that it's not so simple, that there was a lot that needed to be accomplished because of all of the suspicion, not just suspicion, because of all the apparent violations of relational purity that made for David's life to be possible. And so hopefully appreciating this will give us a better understanding of Megillat Rut this time around.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Rabbi. So you would say, though, that the Torah's intent by not listing, you're not allowed to relations with your daughter is possibly to, kind of say, well, maybe the relationship of Moab with his daughters was not so bad.
That's the proposal. That's the suggestion.
Yeah.
And that's I have to give credit to Seth B'Shem Omro. That was what he was a theory that he was introducing, and what I was sort of adding to that was the other piece about Chesed that sort of justifies Lot's daughters doing what they did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So definitely something to think about in terms of both the Arayot, how it relates to the Genesis narrative of Lot and his daughters, and then how that manifests much later on with the Davidic dynasty.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for learning, and we'll continue next week, same place, same time, other side of the family tree.
Thank you.
Okay, Laila Tov.
Night.
Thanks. Bye.